Black founders, Black founders. This is a great topic for the semicentennial of the United States of America this year. Black founders, Black founders. Let's discuss our African American ancestors and what they did, what they were for this nation. Black founders, Black founders, Black founders. What is a founder? Let's just come to grips with some of our terms. Founder is from the Latin fundus, which means the base or the bottom. So this is where we get the word foundation from. So it's a base or a bottom. Founders, in this case, for our lecture now, indicates those who laid and were the foundation of the United States of America. Those who laid the foundation and they were the foundational people for the United States of America. That is, those who played integral roles, essential roles in the origin, creation, and establishment of the nation. Those who played integral roles in the origin, creation, and establishment of the nation. To be a founder, a person, a group of people must contribute significantly in a few of these areas. And this is my own criteria. It can be enhanced, no doubt, but this is what I came up with. The population. Is this people, are this people a part of the charter population, the charter people that make up this nation, that compose and comprise this nation? The culture, I would say necessarily, if a people are a part of the charter, the first population, that they of necessity make up the culture of the nation. And that's the way it has to be. And culture is really the total way of how a people do life. So, really, culture flows into every area of life. All of the areas of life make up the culture, and culture informs every area of life. Labor, and this labor goes into the national wealth. So, a nation runs, a nation operates from work, from work from the population. The population is doing labor that is operating the nation and making it survive and even thrive. This goes into the national wealth, something we've recently called the GDP or the gross domestic product. Once again, this is what a nation needs to survive, sustain itself, and flourish. Warfare. I don't have the exact stats, but probably most nations came about through some type of struggle. It could be a brief struggle, it could be a revolution, or it could be a protracted struggle. In the case of the United States of America, most often the American Revolutionary War is said to be from 1776 to 1783. Some scholars posit a long revolution. and this would be from the 1760s to the 1780s, maybe even the 1890s. But probably a nation is not going to gestate and be conceived apart from some sort of struggle, because there are adversaries aplenty. Warfare, politics, and or governance. So what we mean by politics is the polity. This literally comes from the people. So the people make up the polity of a nation, and that is linked with the governance. It is how a nation, how a people do life, how they operate, the systems, the hierarchies, the administration, the appointed leaders, and finally, institutions. To be founders, people or groups must significantly contribute to a few of these areas. Institutions, this can be anything from businesses, educational institutions, religious institutions, political institutions, etc. Think about this when we are talking about Black founders. Look at these areas and think of the ways that African Americans significantly contributed to the United States of America in its founding years in these areas. When we discuss the founding and establishment of the United States, what time frame roughly are we talking about? We can take a long time period. In this case, the establishment of the first permanent or successful British colony in the present day United States. Jamestown on the coast of Virginia, Tidewater, Virginia. It was established in 1607. It was a charter colony. It wasn't a royal proprietary colony. It was a charter colony, and they named it after King James. This is the King James of the Bible fame. And recently, maybe not so recently, the last 21, 22 years, the basketball great LeBron James is coined or called King James, and that is a nod to the original King James, really probably the Bible. So Jamestown, what happened in Jamestown? Importantly, you've heard a lot about 1619. Importantly, in 1619, 20 odd Africans. I think that's the quote of how many there were. So between 20 and 30 Africans, they are believed to be from Angola, on the Portuguese ship White Lion. They docked at Jamestown and they were sold to the British settlers there. And that is the start of American chattel slavery that we know of. There were many types of enslavement of peoples in the present day United States before then: Spanish slavery, French slavery, some Native American slavery, probably some Dutch slavery. But this is the genesis, the origin of American chattel slavery that our ancestors valiantly endured. Many scholars posit that the United States of America effectively began around this time. When are we saying the end of the foundational period is? Admittedly, this is arbitrary. This is an arbitrary date, but I am putting it after the Civil War, around the end of the Reconstruction period, and this is the late 1870s. I think I can provide a case for why I am placing it in the late 1870s, but this is a good time period, let's say 250, 260, 70 years. So this is the establishment and founding of the United States of America. We will discuss some other possible time spans. This is really interesting to me how Black people, Africans, African Americans, Black Americans have really been enslaved on this American continent longer than we have been free, especially if we're talking about even after our legal emancipation, our political emancipation, there were neo or new and different, diverse forms of enslavement. Then we're really talking about an abbreviated period. What are some issues that I as a historian, have with this lecture? So we should make our biases and our prejudices known upfront. So here they are. I have issues with founding nomenclature. Why? Because not to wind up the old saw, this has been articulated ad infinitum, but the founding of the United States was executed violence, genocide, ethnocide, rapine, chicanery, legerdemain, all a sociopathic jumble. And it was founded on the backs of the deaths of American Indians, Amerindians, the indigenous Native Americans, and through the labor, and for that matter, the deaths of Africans, of Black people. There is no African American, probably, that can speak of the founding of the United States without this in mind. So when it was founded, we were not in a good state. Our ancestors did not have a free and full part in the founding. It was just the opposite. We need to speak of the founding with some hesitation, some measuredness, some reticence. It's not all good here. Moreover, what is the United States? What is the United States? We're going to discuss this in the next slide and really grapple with this throughout the lecture. Is the United States an idea? Is it a group of people? Is it a government structure that has endured? Is it a practice? What exactly is the United States? Your response to this will determine when you think the United States was actually founded. The means of founding, I've sort of adumbrated this, the means of the founding. So that is a real problem. And then the date of the founding links with the identity of the United States. What you think the United States is, the nature of the United States, will probably determine when you believe it was founded. We will say more. What exactly is the United States of America? We often say it's an idea. They are inviolable principles, divine principles, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, equality. We, the people, the demos, the public, freedom of life, speech, religion, activity, freedom to determine your own destiny. If these things are the United States, then what do we want to say? Most people in the United States have these. These are of necessity widespread and dispersed. If the majority of the population do not have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, if the majority of the population are not equal, they do not have freedom of speech, then can it be the United States? Is the United States people? If so, then what people? Who are the people? The population has shifted, morphed, expanded. There's been a little bit of contraction, but mostly it has burgeoned. But people are coming in from diverse places and becoming American. So you may have a problem if you say it's only a lineage of people or only a certain ethnicity. Is the United States a government structure? And if that's the case, what is the government structure? Is it just a place in Philadelphia, Boston, Washington, D.C., that this, let's say these three judicial branches were set up and they maintain themselves? Is that what the United States is? Are they charter documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the amendments? And is the United States a culture? And if so, what is that culture? I think since the 1870s, 1880s, I forgot exactly when the melting pot nomenclature was adopted and generally believed that the United States is a melting pot. If that's the case, and that is the culture, when did this melting pot culture come about? Or was it an openness to a melting pot of cultures, a plurality of people? And is that what the United States is? And if that's the case, then when did it begin to express or manifest this openness? What exactly is the United States of America? And when was the United States founded? Your responses to this slide will determine your responses for this slide. 1619, the enslavement in the United States by the British settlers, quote unquote, of African peoples, and the effective start of American chattel slavery in Jamestown, 1619. I like that date because it does center Black people, who I consider to be the engine of the United States. What made it run? Africans. Africans in America. 1776. July 4th, 1776. The semi-centennial is quickly coming. This is the so-called founders drafting and signing of the Declaration of Independence, saying to King George, we are no longer British citizens. We reject your rule. We are declaring ourselves independent with these dozens of objections to you. We are free and independent people. We reject your rule. We reject your tyranny. 1815, 1812, the War of 1812 is often seen as the final step of full independence from the British Empire, from England, on the part of the Americans. 1812 to 1815. That's when the Star Spangled Banner was written and some other American mainstays were adopted. Is the American founding about independence from Britain? That would be the orientation of 1776 and 1815. Or is the American founding about when America started, made an effort, made a gesture to live up to its ideal? 1865. Now, kind of, sort of, 15 to 20% of the population, Black people, have freedom that you spoke about, have some modicum of equality that you said all men are entitled to. Not quite, very imperfectly. And we may need to give America a pass on this, because what nation ever lives up to its ideal? And isn't the very nature of an ideal that you never quite live up to it, but you're always striving? What type of nation would it be if it adumbrated an ideal that it almost immediately lived up to, and then there was nothing really more to strive for? So maybe America could get a modicum of an excuse there, but not really. 1920. This is when women, let's say white women, got the suffrage. They got the vote. If America is about the demos, the polity, the people, and the government is run by the people, for the people, we the people, it probably is only founded and only a thing when the people can truly speak. When the people, when most of the people finally have a voice. Before then, if it's only a small portion of the people that have a voice in the government, and those small portion of people necessarily tyrannize those, the majority who don't have a vote, how is that a democracy? It's not. Black women still cannot vote. Probably free and clear until 1965. And that's with the Voting Acts. Courageously and violently brought about by our ancestors in the civil rights movement. Then perhaps the majority of Americans can participate in the polity, the running, the operating of the United States. Is that when it was founded? So when is the United States founded? To make this simple for our purposes, we are going to go the genesis, the creation, the origin in the colonial period, and we're going to go about up to the Civil War and Reconstruction, just to make it simple. but I had to problematize, to texture our notions of the United States and its foundings. How did Black people found the United States of America? We are saying Black founders. And by Black founders, I mean Black co founders. I'm not positing that Black people alone created the United States, but it's unwieldy to always say co founders. It's kind of awkward. So, how did Black people found the United States of America? As any good lecture on Black history, let's start with a Du Bois quote. Du Bois had the genius of articulating profound thoughts simply and elegantly. Let's listen to what Du Bois has to say in his seminal Souls of Black Folk. Your country, how came it yours? Before the pilgrims landed, we were here. Here we have brought our three gifts and mingled them with yours. He's talking to white Americans. These are three gifts. Remember that Du Bois has extraordinary explanatory power to make the contributions of Black people succinct. A gift of story and song. We may call this culture. Soft, stirring melody in an ill-harmonized and unmelodious land. Next, the gift of sweat and brawn to beat back the wilderness, conquer the soil, and lay the foundations of this vast economic empire 200 years earlier than your weak hands could have done it. Culture and labor. But with that labor, I would add, and I think Du Bois would, expertise, know-how, innovation, not just brute strength, not just elbow grease, putting your shoulder into it. Expertise, know-how, innovation. The third, a gift of the spirit. And I think that Du Bois means the spirit in several ways. Du Bois thought multi-perspectively, complexly, on many different levels. The spirit is religious, it is emotional, but it's even more metaphysical or numinous, and that is justice and democracy. Around us, the history of the land has centered for thrice 100 years. Out of the nation's heart, we have called all that was best to throttle and subdue all that was worst. Fire and blood, prayer and sacrifice have billowed over this people, and they have found peace only in the altars of the God of right. Nor has our gift of the Spirit been merely passive. Du Bois consistently invades against the idea that African Americans were just acted upon and were not actors, that they were just passive and docile laborers and were not actors, executors, agents. Actively, we have woven ourselves with the very warp and woof of this nation. We fought their battles. Take note of this. We fought their battles, shared their sorrow, mingled our blood with theirs, and generation after generation have pleaded with a headstrong, careless people to despise not justice, mercy, and truth, lest the nation be smitten with the curse. Remember, this is the gift of spirit. Our song, our toil, our cheer, and warning have been given to this nation in blood brotherhood. Are not these gifts worth the giving? Is not this work and striving? Would America, this is the quintessential interrogative, would America have been America without her Negro people? Would America have been America without her Negro people? Profound, profound. The answer to this rhetorical question is a resounding, of course not. How did Black people found America? They were there, they were here. I'm in Maryland. They were certainly here. One of the original 13 colonies, Maryland, they were here. They were here. We were present. We were present. That's why Du Bois called it the gifts. Black people comprised about a quarter of the colonial population in the 18th century. And it will fluctuate between a quarter and a fifth of the colonial population. Black people were here. We were here from the start. What does our good brother Malcolm X say? We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock was landed, was thrust upon us. We were here from the beginning. Who said in the beginning was America? It wasn't Tolstoy. It wasn't Marx. I'm trying to think who said that. If America was in the beginning, we were there at the beginning. This is key. Black people were the charter population. Everything flows from that. You can't found something if you weren't there. Moreover, if you were there, you were a part of, as Du Bois says, the warp and the woof. You contributed to every aspect. If you were there, it has to be that way. We were not only there, we were proximate to everything that was going on in these founding centuries. By 1776, the year of the rending of the British colonies from Britain, England, there were more than 500,000 Black people in the colonies. And you can see some of the population distribution in this slide. I would say that in 1776, there were approximately 2.5 million people total in the colonies. So Black people were between a fifth and a quarter of the population. I want you to look at this map with the population. What colony has the highest population of African Americans? Which colony? This is critical. Virginia. Virginia is the power base of the American Revolution. It's the birthplace of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison. James Madison, George Mason. Who am I missing? So many key founders. James Monroe and James Madison are from Virginia. This is the power base of the American Revolution. And Black people comprised about 40% of the most strategic and important colony, Virginia. This is key. And it's a motif throughout this lecture. Black people are always there. They're always there. They are there where things are happening. They are there where things are occurring. That is no happenstance. It's no coincidence. Black people built the colonial economy through labor. And by this, I mean partly built. These slides are not meant to be hyperbolic. I'm not saying that they built everything in the colonial economy or even were more than 50% of the colonial economy, but they were integral and contributed massively to the colonial GDP, as it were. Black people labored in every possible way in the colonies. Of course, agriculture, domestic, maritime, military, construction, other forms of labor, forest clearing, you name it, business, all types of labor. This is not unthinking, unmindful labor. That's long been debunked. Black people labored intelligently and expertly. Of course, as with every labor force, there were levels to this. But by all accounts, Black people were superb laborers and intelligent laborers. Innovation. Black people contributed innovatively. What do you see here? This is a map of Washington, D.C., when it became the capital of the fledgling nation. And Black people, let's use Washington, D.C. as a synecdoche, a part of the whole of the larger nation. Black people contributed to the founding of Washington, D.C., obviously from wealth, from their labor, but beyond that, in the very design of the city, the construction of the city, the planning of the city, the expansion of the city, the clearing of the city, you name it. And most famously, with Benjamin Banneker, who was one of the surveyors of Washington, D.C. You've also heard of the White House. And I'm mentioning this because this is a storied example. Black people assisted with the planning and construction of the White House. They literally took part in the building of the edifice and the agricultural milieu of the White House, all around the White House. And they were instrumental in its operations. Cooks, domestics, agriculturalists, servants, clothing designers, and others. So I'm saying that this is a synecdoche, and this represents Black expertise and Black labor for the entire nation, the entire nation. Black people fought in every colonial. So remember that we said that the United States was really founded not by one big war or a long protracted war, the American Revolution, 1776 to 1783, but a succession of wars that got the colonials to that point. Black people fought in all of these wars, including the pivotal French Indian War, the 7 Years' War. Black people were there fighting in the wars. And I say this without irony, I'm not being facetious. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. They were unheralded, they were neglected, unacknowledged as warriors. But they were there in every single war and every single war since. This is heavily remarked upon on how Black people fought in all the wars and they fought valiantly in all the wars. The War of 1812, Mexican American War, Civil War, on and on. Now, as I said, as a historian, this is not all good because with war participation, there is some culpability in the settler colonial project, a genocidal one, I think that they all are, of Black people, because Black people were enabling. We can get to that later because I have some thoughts on it. I often think that yes, there were Black patriots, but let's take the Revolutionary War. Black people were fighting with the desiderata, the motivation of every other soldier, probably, and that was to be free. The colonials promised Black people freedom. Many times they were lying. They didn't free them when Black people fought. And the British were offering Black people freedom. I think about 15 to 20,000 Black people fought for the British in the Revolutionary War. And on the colonial side, around 5 to 10,000. It was sort of a catch-22. Who do you trust to give you freedom? But Black people fought in every colonial war. We were there. We're going to touch on this several times in this lecture. This won't be the last time you hear this sort of thing. Because we were there, we shaped colonial culture and society. We don't have time to get into how exactly we shaped it. We will touch later on religion, education, the arts, music, linguistics, politics, all areas Black people shaped colonial culture and society. Listen to this. The founders, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, James Monroe, James Madison, gained their wealth, the wealth that they had, primarily from slavery. Haven't you thought about how your George Washington and Thomas Jefferson had the standing and influence that they did? How did they have time to just politic all day and plan and fight? How were they getting the wealth to do this, the wherewithal to do this? It was Black people. Jefferson and Washington, particularly, were offenders in this regard. They had hundreds of enslaved black people throughout their lives. They own hundreds of black human beings throughout their lives. And these black people held them down. They held their domestic affairs down. They generated wealth for them. They kept their estate running so that they could declare independence. They could engage in fighting. They could be diplomats. Jefferson did a little bit of everything. He was the governor of Virginia. He was a vice president. He was the president. He had other posts. Black people were generating wealth for him and running his operations. This is essential. This is essential. Behind every white founder are hundreds of capable black people running their affairs. How do you like that spin on the old saw? All of these white men there, finely dressed, in tights and wigs, generated by black wealth. This is sorely unremarked on, sorely unremarked on. 41 out of 58 of the signers of the Declaration of Independence owned black human beings. 76%. And this is how they got the standing. And I don't want to overstate it. Could they have had the standing without black people? No, I think that they would have been working and laboring. This was a rough and tumble society. It was hard to get ahead. I don't, what what career was there to just be a politician, a revolutionary that didn't involve generating real wealth back then? The stock market wasn't something then that you could make an entire living on. You couldn't speculate. You had to get it by the sweat of your brow. You could be a businessman, but also often even these city businessmen, let's say in Boston or Philadelphia, they had black people helping them. What did Du Bois say? You couldn't do this by yourself in 200 years. What did he mean by that? He meant that beyond every stockinged, white wigged, white male were hundreds of black people enabling this person. Most importantly for this lecture, African Americans would compel America to live up to its founding principles: equality, democracy, freedom, the people, the common man, the common woman, the common person. These are the ideals on which America was founded. King George, we've had enough of your tyranny. We are human beings that are endowed with the dignity of free will, individuality, choice, freedom of speech, freedom to determine our destiny. But this was all legerdemain. It was tricks on paper. The signers were writing these things while they themselves were tyrannizing and oppressing and enslaving black human beings. What are black people going to do? They're going to compel, to wrench the nation to live up to its founding ideals. these ideals are not worth anything, or they're worth very little when they only apply to a select cadre of white, British descended, Protestant, landed, which means land owning, some formal education, adult, straight males. The story of America is Black people, and yes, others, of course, women, Native Americans, children, poor people, expanding this. But I'm positing that Black people were the major ones who were expanding this. The often ballyhooed and booed theory of intersectionality is key here. It's key here. Intersectionality means that of all these things you see on the screen, every degree that you are away from these things are a point of discrimination in society. So you're not white, you are Black or Asian or Native American. You're not British descended, you are Italian. You're Irish, you're Jewish, you're not Protestant, you're Catholic or Islamic or Muslim, rather. You're not landed, you're poor. You're not educated. You're a child. You're a woman. Every degree from this, you can be discriminated against by those who fit this criteria, which were the founders. The founders made a nation for themselves and where they could thrive, where they could have the power, and everyone else would be subservient to them, similarly to how they were subservient, how they perceived themselves to be subservient to King George. What African Americans are going to do is stretch democracy, so-called democracy, purported democracy, and make America more democratic for more people. More people are going to be free. More people are going to have rights. More people are going to be able to participate in the political process, which is how we live. More people are going to be treated equally. We must expand democracy past this privileged cadre. Who's going to do the job? That's the real revolution. This revolution was just one group of privileged white men obtaining power in another part of the world. This was the story. This was the story. Thomas Jefferson owned more than 600 slaves throughout his life. The most storied of these enslaved Black people is Sally Hemings. All props to our good sister Annette Gordon Reed, the Pulitzer Prize winning historian, who has brought out that Thomas Jefferson really repeatedly raped Sally Hemings, his slave. And this really says that not only were Black people enabling Thomas Jefferson to be who he was, but they were even a part of the founding families. The Hemings have a whole line of descendants, and they're still with us today. Black people were a part of the founding family. And by the way, I don't use that term rape lightly, but what I mean by it is that you cannot have such a obvious power differential where Thomas Jefferson is the master of Sally Hemings and he makes sexual advances toward her and it is in any way equal or consensual. You can throw that out the window. It is undue pressure. It is not consensual. Thomas Jefferson, many things, ultimately a hypocrite. I know that calling a human a hypocrite is redundant because we are all hypocrites in our way, but a glaring hypocrite, one who wrote with the pen of angel, but was involved in skullduggery on his Monticello estate. A genius, a Renaissance man. But how are we as African Americans to look at him? We are going to make good on his words and compel the nation to live up to his lofty principle. George Washington, the father, so-called father of the nation, owned more than 500 black captives throughout his life, including his lieutenant, his valet, William Lee, which he simply couldn't do without. He couldn't do without. Remember that I said we were there. Black people are essential to the operation of Mount Vernon. Listen to this. Erica Armstrong Dunbar has documented, and this is all pillars making a foundation, giving us a fuller view of the founders. We can talk all day about their positives, their positive attributes. But one thing that we cannot say is a narrative that one time prevailed that they were kind to their slaves, to enslaved black people. Sometimes I'll refer to them, forgive me, in shorthand as slaves. That they were kind to their slaves, that they freed them all throughout their lives. And upon their death, they all went free. No, Dunbar establishes that an enslaved woman of George Washington's own a judge escaped, and George Washington deployed the full power of the American presidency to capture her. But what does the title say? She was never caught. She eluded Washington at every turn. She was never caught. This is the venality and the baseness of a founder, the founding father that worked so hard for his people, for his kind, but would deny and indeed prosecute to the fullest extent a search for the capture and the unfreedom, the bondage of a black woman. Now do you know why don't black people often not see America as other people see America? And I know that this has changed. You'll see African Americans with American flags and patriots and and military service, and we've always done this to a certain degree. But the talk about the founders, about what the founders meant and why, because our people were enslaved by them. How sanguine can you get? How poetic can you wax when you very easily deduce that if you were alive back then, you would be, yes, massa. And that's not a parody. I'm being serious. You would have to be subservient to the so-called founding fathers. So how, once again, how much can you tout and apotheosize and deify the so-called founding fathers? Presidents who own slaves. Once again, we are talking about how Black people founded America. The highest executives in the nation, the highest executives, owned Black human beings and exploited them, I believe, to become presidents. You know that it all goes in to becoming presidents. It has to be a sort of like a perfect storm. It has to be hitting on all cylinders. 12 presidents owned slaves, and this was in the time period in which they could. That would probably be up to like the 1880s, maybe even up to McKinley. You could ostensibly have owned or been in a family owning a family who owned slaves. We've already touched on this, but let's touch on it again. Wealth generated from labor of enslaved Black people heavily funded the American Revolution. It's almost as if we imagine that the funding for the American Revolution just fell from the trees. That it was about the grit, the foresight, the genius of George Washington and others, Hamilton, Marquise de Lafayette, on and on. And nothing needed to fund it. Like all wars have been expensive, but this one. Where did the money come from? We know personally, as we said with your George Washington and others, that they were funded by Black labor. But beyond that, the American Revolution, against impossible odds, the British Empire, on which the sun never set because it had conquered so many people across the world. You can look at the America, I've often said that we need to stop white on white violence. What's up with all this white on white violence? And that's the story of the entire European history. White people, white nations just constantly fighting against each other. They bring that stuff to the New World. The original people fighting over territory and goods in the United States, which they accuse us of all the time now, but these were the original people who were doing this, white on white violence. They bring it over into the New World and they're just fighting each other. The history of North, Central, and South America is often just the French, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the British, the Dutch, more or less, just fighting each other. They're just shifting the wars from Europe to the New World. Oftentimes, Native Americans are just their proxies, and they're really just fighting each other through Native Americans. And by the way, there was a lot of vice versa as well. One thing that I didn't mention with the founding of the United States is that, yes, British white people were the main displacers, the main genociders. Let's add the Spanish and the Spanish and the Italian as well. Yeah, the Spanish and the Portuguese as well. Let's add the Spanish and the Portuguese as well. But many Native American peoples were imperialists themselves. Pekka Hamalainen has a good book, a recent book on the Comanche Empire and how the Comanches were the imperialists of the Native Americans, and they were often killing, genociding, ethnociding, annexing, exterminating other Native American peoples in a similar way, though on a much smaller scale than Europeans did to them. And when you study the names of the Native American people groups, let's say the Navajo, which is the Dene, the Lenape, the Apache, I'm saying the original names, not the anglicized names. These mean the people, the ones, the originals. They were displacing themselves. So if you're in, let's say, Washington, D.C., right near to me, and you say, this is the ancestral land of the Lenape people, we want to acknowledge them, that is true. There is nothing wrong with that. That's a good thing to say. However, they often displaced other Native American people. So to find the true people of the land, you would have to go back several iterations. I hope that this makes sense. And Native American people did not see themselves as one people. They were diverse in the same way that Africans were diverse in West Central Africa. The Asante, the Yoruba, the Ewe, the Fon, Dahomey, Congo, the Europeans, French, Italian, Spanish, British, Dutch. The Native Americans were the same way. Endlessly diverse, not homogenous. They did not see themselves as homogenous. Excuse that digression. Hopefully, it was a productive digression. The wealth that was needed, the funding that was needed, wars are so expensive. The American Revolution, what was my point? My point was this was like an impossible task. Although the colonials did not need to win, they just had to outlast the British. The British had to lose. It devolved into guerrilla warfare. You needed money. You needed wealth. You needed products, materials. And this greatly came from Black people. Black people. Black people also exemplified and expanded freedom and democracy. I am coming back to this, particularly here in the revolutionary era. In the center, you have an enslaved woman, Phyllis Wheatley. She is from modern day Gambia or Senegal. She was the poet laureate, if you can imagine this, the poet laureate of the American Revolution. She is writing great battle poetry, odes to George Washington and others. And she was at one time enslaved. Remind me, when was she emancipated? But she is writing this from the perspective of an enslaved Black woman, and yet she is able to wax eloquent and versify and poeticize liberty and freedom in the minds of a white person. She's able to do that. This is genius by any stretch of the imagination. And this is a real contribution. Crispus Attucks. You see our brother Crispus Attucks, probably you're right to Phillis Wheatley and top. The first martyr, how was a black person at one time enslaved? Probably. How was Crispus Attucks the first martyr of the American Revolution? And he had great iconic power, and he was often hailed and summoned as the first martyr. Benjamin Banneker, we've discussed him, an autodidact, a polymath, creating an almanac, which you had to know a lot about a whole lot. One of the designers of the nation's capital, James Armistead Lafayette, a courageous soldier and spy of the American Revolution, played a critical role. Lemuel Haynes, who wrote an alternative to the Declaration of Independence in 1776. And it was a powerful critique of the hypocrisy of the ideals. The ideals are great, the principles are great, but can we please live them out vis-a-vis Black people? Black people fought and assisted in the Revolutionary War, not only fighting, but assisting on every single level. Battle preparation, sewing clothes. Grace Wisher sewed the flag. Cleanup, maritime, medical, food preparation, you name it. Black people assisted this war effort. We were there, we were there, we were there. Moving along, moving along. This one's very important. Remember that we said that stuff just happens. And then historians come along later and try to make sense and meaning from the stuff that happened in the past. That's the process of doing history. Historians have identified after the American Revolution, there's a period of intense religious revival called the Second Great Awakening. This is when a lot of Americans got woke. The Second Great Awakening, the Christianization, if you will. The first Great Awakening, yes. The Second Great Awakening, even greater. The Christianization of America, with all of its hypocrisy and problems and white Christianity, Euro Christianity, America did largely become Christianized during this time, so that by the 1840s or 50s, probably most Americans were Protestant Christians. And what were the two largest denominations? Methodists and Baptists, which had a large Black contingent. Black people were right there in the creation of American Methodism. So these are both European exports and Baptists. To this day, Black people, African Americans who are Christians, are mostly Methodists, whether it's Methodist Episcopal, African Methodist Episcopal AME, AMEZ, CME, and Baptist, NBC. Probably when you say that you're non-denominational, you're probably Baptist leaning. Black people and white people came together and created American Protestantism, Baptist and Methodist. Black people were almost full participants in these revivals. One historian has posited that this was the democratization of Christianity. That's probably overstated. Christianity became more democratic. And there was a sliver of time in which the spirit could so come on you that it would circumvent the white male power structure, and black men and black women and white women were prophesying and preaching. And in these powerful revivals, American Christianity was born. If America ever was a Christian nation, black people were instrumental in making it so. And as one historian said, because most Americans were Methodists, say most Americans who were Christians were Methodists, maybe even most Americans at one time, maybe over 50%. I don't know. The history of the Methodist Church is in many ways the history of America. And black people are integral in that. Not only did black people found the United States, but they were integral in the founding of individual states. One example is in 1820, Maine joins the Union through a maneuver with Missouri over what? You guessed it, slavery. And with the establishment of each state, you can see black people, not always the leading role, I'm not saying that, but integral, important in the establishment of that state. Whether through the 3/5 clause, through the labor from slavery, generating the income, the know-how, the industry, the innovation of the state, black people were there and were integral. Forgive the redundancy. Forgive my redundancies. I'm just trying to emphasize free African Americans participated also in society. We often think black people were just enslaved. There were obviously hundreds of thousands of free African Americans in the Upper South and the North, and they participated in society. Marginalized, limited, but they participated as much as they could, and many a lot. And that includes paying taxes and voting. Black men could vote in certain states at certain times before the amendments of the 1860s and 1870, when black men participated in politics at an unprecedented rate. There were actually two black governors, PBS Pinchback and Oscar Dunn of Louisiana. This was an unprecedented time. Black senators, black men could actually vote before that in certain states at certain times, namely New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. What about the educational infrastructure? So we said at the beginning, if you are going to be a founder or co-founder, you must significantly contribute to, remember all the areas we had: culture, politics, governance. You have to be a part of the population. You have to generate the wealth, the labor. One of those is institution. So let's just talk about educational institutions. These were the seminal, the charter colleges, higher education of the colonies. And black people, of course, were there, accounted for, contributors. And the schools, the Ivy League schools, are now coming to grips with, just now, I would say the last 10, 15 years, with the yeoman contribution that black people made to their educational institutions. These are all books saved for the Princeton. That's a website, but they have these initiatives to figure out exactly, okay, how did Black people contribute to the founding of our schools? They needed cultivation, they needed capital, the schools did. Even our students are coming from slave-holding families, and it's just invaluable. Black people should rightly be among consideration for founding of these institutions. I don't think that I'm overstating my case. Read these books. Read these books. Black people made the new nation run in all ways that a new nation can run, must run. Black people did it. Even in times of crisis, think of the COVID-19 pandemic that we lived through 5, 6 years ago. Black people helped save the nation during the pandemics of their day. One example of this is the yellow fever epidemic in Philadelphia in 1793. Philadelphia is like the still the first city of the United States. What it may be Boston. It probably wasn't New York then. New York hadn't reached that level yet, but Philadelphia was like the first city. It was the primary city, and there was a yellow fever outbreak, and Black people, namely Richard Allen and Absalom Jones, two Methodist ministers slash politicians. There was a time where the ministry and politics, there was kind of like a thin line. They definitely intersected, and Black people saved many lives during this epidemic. Black people established the legal and social framework. The most touted and storied instances of this are the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments in the 1860s and 70s, and the Civil Rights Acts, really from Brown versus Board of Education all the way to what? Loving versus Virginia. Is that 1967? All of those acts that have been tremendous for people of all colors and stripes and backgrounds in the United States. But this goes beyond that. Black people and their freedom suits expanded, strengthened the legal and social framework of the United States. This, once again, this goes beyond Dred Scott and some of these more famous cases. But Black people, we need to look at emancipation as on a continuum. It wasn't just 1863 to 1865. It was from 1619 on, individual Black people were obtaining their freedom through purchasing it, through escaping, through being manumitted by their masters and mistresses. But they were also engaging with the legal system to obtain their freedom. And they were often getting it. And Black people contributed to the legal framework in other ways beyond just having to do with bondage. This seems counterintuitive. How did Black people help create a white identity? There's some wonderful scholarship on this. Remember that we said that white people were constantly, Europe in the 14, 15, 1600s was a Donnybrook, just endless wars and conflicts that really anticipated the industrial level slaughter of World War I and II. With World War II, they estimate maybe 70 to 100 million people died. It's sometimes hard to quantify how many people died in war, but just massive, unheard of levels of what is it? The 30-year war? I think the 30-year war in and of itself, I think it's a 30-year war. 15 million Europeans dead, and this was when the population was obviously much less than it is now. How did white people come to the new world, Europeans rather, come to the new world and suddenly become white? Well, it wasn't sudden. They were British, Spanish, French, Dutch, and they coalesced to become white in contradistinction to Africans, to Black people in the United States. I must say, this is also Native Americans as well. So we are forging a white identity and we're making you Black. We're making you non white. Let's coalesce, let's mobilize to effectively oppress and be supreme over everyone else, namely Black people. And this was an uneven, irregular process. We know that Italians, up until I don't know what year, maybe the 1930s, 1940s, Irish, Jewish people, they were often called anti-Black. They were anti-Black pejoratives were used against them. And there was a process for them to become white. But a white identity was established, as we said, in contradistinction to Black people. This is important. For all of the expansion of America, remember the initial 13 colonies, they are closest to Britain, right on the coast. And then America just is a story of expansion, not without serious problems, not without extermination, not without ethnic cleansing. But Black people did aid in this expansion, both on the seas and the waters. That is not only the Atlantic, the Gulf of Mexico, what is it, Gulf of America, Gulf of Mexico, the Pacific, but also riverine ways, the Mississippi, Colorado, the Missouri, and then the westward expansion, the so-called cowboy culture. These are enslaved Black people who are, I think, masterfully caring for the agriculture. Cow boy is a pejorative word for a Black person, a Black man. Horses, Mustangs. Black people are with the explorers, with the pioneers, helping with linguistics, scouting, surveying, fighting. Black people and Native Americans have an interesting relationship. Native Americans and Black people often got together, lived together in harmony. Sometimes it was acrimonious. Native Americans owned Black slaves. Black people were involved in wars, killing Native American peoples. It's complex. But Black people were important parts of the westward expansion. Like I said, this could be a rather this could be construed as negative. But as the philosophical youth of today say, it is what it is. We are wrapping this up. We're wrapping this up. We're wrapping this up. One demographic historian did the research and approximates that of all the Black people that were enslaved in the United States, let's say from 1619 to the 1860s, all the Black people were enslaved in the United States. Not at any one time. We know that the Civil War, 500,000 Black people emancipated themselves during the Civil War, and then probably by Juneteenth, 4 million Black people were emancipated. But of all the Black people who were enslaved in the United States, it was about 10 million Black people. And they worked an estimated 410 billion hours. 410 billion hours, which is mind-boggling, staggering, and frankly, probably incalculable. The amount of hours. Think about that for our reparations claim. Reparation claim of African Americans. Not only those hours, but inflation, vacations. Now, I'm saying we didn't have vacation. You have to factor that in. Vacations, psychological damage, maternity leave, paternity leave, sexual harassment, overtime. Come on. Slavery is going to be integral to the foundation of the United States. We said during the colonial era, the American Revolution, the establishment of the new nation, and then on into the United States distinguishing itself, rising to superpower global status, it generated half of GDP of the colonies, helped fund the American Revolution, fueled the American economy, and enabled us to become a world power, influenced every major political decision. Perhaps it's a little bit of hyperbole, but I don't know. The slave power was always vying with the free power and vice versa in Congress, the Senate, and in other levels of government. What political decision was that not a dynamic or factor in? You can tell me if you think that this is overstated. It often determined statehood and status. Slavery, at least 12 presidents, we've gone over this, and that was a quarter of all American presidents, a quarter now. But back then, when it was within the possible time period, it was a lot more than that. Obviously, every American benefited directly or indirectly from slave labor. Yes, it didn't matter if you kept enslaved Black people, if you had enslaved Black people. You benefited from it. You benefited from it. Enslaved people contributed to medical innovations and medical fields. Slavery was partly responsible for the flourishing of capitalism. How did capitalism actually work? How did it catch on from Wall Street in Manhattan? Even before then, the industrial revolutions of Britain, the British Empire for that matter, Spanish Empire, French Empire. These are enabled by slavery, modern banking, modern insurance, modern credit, the royal companies, the stocks. This is modern capitalism. Millions of Americans left the Union over slavery. If Black people, if African Americans and their status was a small thing, if we didn't matter, then why was the costliest American war in terms of life and resources fought over the status of Black people? If we didn't matter. 750,000 people dead. Those are the latest estimates. Previously, 600,000. Slavery defined and expanded American ideals of democracy. There are some great works on this. There's a whole subgenre, there's a whole genre of accounting for, pun intended, the enslavement of Black human beings. Once again, we're not only talking about brawn and brute work. Black people are bringing brilliance, innovation, deftness, dexterity, genius to their labor. The expertise, agricultural, harvesting, landscaping, construction, industry, management, irrigation, mining, metallurgy, leather work, weaving, sewing, and we've done so much good work in this. Think of, is it, I can actually get this book for you. Slavery and Ethnicities and African Ethnicities in the Americas by Gwendolyn Midlo Hall. She does a good job of identifying where certain Black slaves and groups of slaves came from in West Central Africa and what was their expertise there and how they brought and employed that expertise in the New World, namely the United States of America. And there are many other stories. Let's say uh, an Asante person, a part of the Asante peoples, was adept in gold mining, metallurgy, and they are enslaved and taken to a place in Chile or Brazil to mine for gold. And they bring their metallurgic expertise there. That sort of thing. Leatherwork, weaving, sewing, trading, prospecting, pregnancy care, housekeeping, child rearing, medicine, cuisine, music. Black people brought their expertise to, I believe, make this country what it is, to bring out the good in America. One word about enslaved Black women as domestic managers. Yes, these images speak 1,000 words, more than that, volumes. Black women raised white children in the South and the North. A good portion. Am I saying all? Of course not. But a good portion. The earliest memory, I think it's Jefferson, for instance, the earliest memory was of a Black woman helping deliver him as his nursemaid, and then his last memory of a Black assistant helping him as he died. Black women are often managers of the plantation home, of the homes in the North, the homes in the urban South. They are exceptional in raising children, nursemaids, although I think that we can find a more politically correct term for that. Just domestic scientists par excellence. And multi-managing, because at the same time, the man of the house and the sons and the uncles are trying to sexually harass you. Hello, Harriet Jacobs. It's an impossible situation, but Black women navigated it. And these are our forebears. These are our ancestors. So many famed white people that you know in American history were raised by Black women. Enslaved Black people and American music. I posit, and this is not me, this is so many other people, that the genres of American popular music that you now know came from slave songs. Negro spirituals, work songs, they came from it. R&B, rap, hip hop, alternative, heavy metal, jazz, blues. Give me some American country music, folk music. It came from enslaved Black people. It's that soul, it's the emotion, it's the struggle. That's infused. It's the rhythm, it's the life, it's the vibrancy, it's the vitality, it's the charisma, it's the swagger, it's the resilience of Black people infused into the music. American food, the foodways of Black people, Black cuisine, extraordinary. This is all America. This is America. This is the America we know. American English. Black people, many Black people, were linguistic savants, and they innovated Afro Dutch, Afro Spanish, Afro French, Afro English, also their own languages, Gullah Geechee, Gumbo, Creole, Tutnese. Black people have all of these forms of English and more. But beyond that, the English that we have today, do you hear how much we now there's not even in Ebonics, there's not even a AAVE, African American Vernacular English. It's just English. And you hear it all the time from everybody. It's just a part of the culture. I'm saying American of all races, of all ethnicities. It's second nature. Everybody uses so-called Black English. This is American culture, and it's hard won. It was hard won by our ancestors. And finally, once again, to reiterate, abolitionism and democracy. Black people made good on the American principles by compelling, forcing America to emancipate them and include them in the democratic process, to fully incorporate and franchise them, not only them, but women, children, immigrants, LGBT people, the poor. Who, who haven't Black people fought for? Who haven't, through our democratic expansion efforts, our efforts for equality, our human justice, who haven't we benefited? We've already touched on this. In a weird way, the American Civil War was a testament to how important African Americans were to the United States. Could this be the real founding of the United States? Before they say that America was referred to as these United States. Afterwards, it became the United States. Before it was kind of pluralistic. I mean, I don't want to go too far with that. But once we got this slavery thing in this, I don't know, freedom, equality, somewhat. Once we got that right, did we become more true then to the founding principles of equality, justice, liberty, freedom? We started with some Du Bois. Let's end with some Du Bois. It was the Black man that raised a vision of democracy in America, such as neither Americans nor Europeans conceived in the 18th century, and such as they have not even accepted in the 20th century. And yet, a conception which every clear sighted man knows is true and inevitable. It is usually assumed in reading American history that whatever the Negro has done for America has been passive and unintelligent, that he accompanied the explorers as a beast of burden and accomplished whatever he did by sheer accident, that he labored because he was driven to labor and fought because he was made to fight. This is not true. On the contrary, it was the rise and growth among the slaves of a determination to be free and an active part of American democracy that forced American democracy continually to look into the depths, that held the faces of American thought to the inescapable fact that as long as there was a slave in America, America could not be a free republic. And more than that, that as long as there were people in America, slave or nominally free, who could not participate in government and industry and society as free, intelligent human beings, our democracy had failed of its greatest mission. This great vision of the Black man was, of course, at first the vision of the few, as visions always are, but it was always there. It grew continuously and it developed quickly from wish to active determination. One cannot think then of democracy in America or in the modern world without reference to the American Negro. The democracy established in America in the 18th century was not and was not designed to be a democracy of the masses of men, and it was thus singularly easy for people to fail to see the incongruity of democracy and slavery. It was the Negro himself who forced the consideration of this incongruity, who made emancipation inevitable and made the modern world at least consider, if not wholly accept, the idea of a democracy including men of all races and colors. Here are some good works that I drew from, that I commend to you to study the Black founders of the United States of America. You can pause the screen. I can send you this bibliography. I have many of these. We have many of these books in PDF. Salute to our Black ancestors. Salute to our Black ancestors.